Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Khalid. But today is the 20th of August 2024 and the Israel-Palestine war that has entered its 319th day. Anthony Blinken calls it the last opportunity for Gaza ceasefire, but is it the last opportunity for Gaza ceasefire is another question that a lot of people are asking, because the US and its support to Israel is nothing but transparent. They said the number of casualties also keeps on increasing per day. We have now gone to the number of 40,173 killed and 92,657 at least wounded since the 7th of October. And of course, the protests have also been going on across the world, in the US in particular, where the Democratic Convention, National Convention is also going on, where Joe Biden also talked about Palestine, but at the same time there were also a lot of pro-Palestinians that were marching in Chicago on the opening day of this Democratic National Convention, and is to show of force against the Biden administration's support for Israel in the Gaza war. At the same time, Hamas has also accused the US of buying time for Israel to continue its genocide after the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had accepted a bridging proposal for a Gaza truce deal and has urged the Palestinian group to do the same. But whether all of this under the peace deal is transparent, whether it is the same peace deal that Joe Biden had proposed, is another question altogether. We discuss that. We've been joined in the studio by Khalid Taimur Akram Saab. He's an international relations expert. Thank you very much, Khalid Taimur Saab, to have joined us. Khalid Taimur Saab, Hamas accuses the US of buying time for Israel to continue its genocide after Anthony Blinken announces that, of course, finally Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to our three-point peace deal that Joe Biden had been propagating since quite a number of weeks. Hamas has also informed Turkey that despite US optimism of negotiations, the actual situation is very different. What's your take on these developments?
First of all, we have to see the present internal situation in United States, because this is the election year in US, and recently we have seen President Joe Biden exiting under a lot of pressure, and Kamala Harris filling in his shoes. So right now, both the political parties in US, they are worried about the election results, and none of them is ready to take any kind of stand on the Israeli issue, because as we know that lots of donors in the US presidential campaign are Jews, and they have a very big lobby in US. So yes, Hamas is right that US wants to buy time, but US is not buying time generally that Israel should carry out genocide. I would say that US is buying time for its own elections, and I don't think that till November, when the election will happen, till then US government will be able to play any kind of assertive role over Israel. But this is the time that the other forces like China and Russia and the other countries can play a role, but unfortunately Israel is only looking towards US for some kind of deal, which Israel also knows this thing, that right now the US administration, and especially the Biden administration, which is now at the lowest ebb of its popularity in US, can take any kind of assertive action against Israel. So that is one of the main reasons. But people of Palestine are suffering. Israel is carrying out genocide every day, and every day we find that the next attack is more and more volatile and more aggressive, because Israeli government right now is very clear about the status of the US government, that they cannot and they will not do any kind of adverse action against
But
Israel.
Khalid Taimur Saab, when you look at the Israeli side, in fact, it is Dr. Bassam Naim, who's a member of Hamas's political bureau. He says that we are urging the world to pressurize Netanyahu and the Israeli government to sign the ceasefire deal that was actually proposed by Joe Biden, the 3-point peace deal, because they are saying that Israel has added certain amendments to that, which includes no withdrawal from the Rafah crossing, no withdrawal from the Philadelphia crossing, no withdrawal from the NEWSROOM route, the inspection of returning displaced people moving from north to south, alterations to the agreed upon prisoner exchange deal, effectively nullifying its substance, tying humanitarian aid and reconstruction to the acceptance of the aforementioned conditions, and there are so many other conditionalities, also demanding a written commitment from the Americans allowing the resumption of hostilities if so decided. If these are the preconditionalities, then what is the need for a ceasefire agreement?
Actually, initially once the Joe Biden had suggested that peace agreement, he was in the election run. So he probably, what I can assess as an analyst, that he probably thought that he would have this peace deal and he would use the peace deal for his election campaign. But eventually we saw him exiting from the election race, and then after that this new conditions have been put by the Israeli government, because now Israeli government knows that Joe Biden has practically no interest in any kind of deal. So that is the reason I think that they have added this condition, because the initial peace deal was very simple. It included that the Israeli forces will go back to the original positions. It included that humanitarian points will be open. It included that the aid will be allowed to come and the prisoner exchange. So it was a very simple deal.
Exactly.
Exactly, because at that time President Joe Biden was using this conflict to his benefit for the elections. As we know that Trump also had a different point of view toward the Israel, because it was during President Trump's time that Israel was signing Abrahamic Accord with various countries. So he and his son-in-law, Trump's son-in-law, they also have a different point of view. So keeping in view the election campaign, President Joe Biden wanted to have this peace deal. But right now, as the tables have turned in US, and now we have a new candidate, Kamala Harris, who is the presidential candidate from the governing party, but she practically is not directly involved in this peace process as President Joe Biden is, because the Secretary of the State, he reports to Joe Biden. He is not directly reporting to Kamala Harris.
Speaking of the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, he is now in Egypt, from where he will also be going to Qatar. He's going to, meet all the leaders in Egypt and in Qatar. We also know that these two countries are on the forefront when it comes to this very peace deal that Joe Biden has proposed. Karine Jean-Pierre, who is the White House press secretary, tells reporters that senior officials will convene again in Cairo before the end of the week to continue talks on a ceasefire in Gaza. Anthony Blinken also says that these ongoing negotiations are maybe the last chance to reach an agreement to end the hostilities. Do you feel the US is doing enough? Because you've just said that US is in a precarious situation because of the change in or the political developments that have been happening there. But then in this case, is the US doing enough for this ceasefire to come through?
No, US is not doing enough, because we have to see US is not including the other players, the international players. As we see China is a very big player, because China is the only country which was able to bring together all the factions of
and sign an agreement,
and they had an agreement. So China has a big stake now, because if now the Palestinian movement has a voice, it is because of China, because they made all the stakeholders together. Why US is not taking China in confidence? Why US is not taking Qatar in confidence? Because Qatar has been hosting all sorts of negotiations in the past. Why is US again and again going to Egypt? Egypt is now closely allied with US. So they don't have to go to Egypt again and again, because Egypt and Jordan, they have already agreed to US terms and conditions regarding this. So I think these.
But Anthony Blinken is going to go to Qatar once he finishes his tour of Egypt.
But as I'm saying, that they are just buying time, because now we are stepping in September. So September and October, they are the most crucial. They are the last 60 days of the election campaign.
True.
So the US government is just buying time, and Israelis are taking advantage of this. I think this is the time that UN Secretary General should intervene. UN Secretary General should, using his power as UN Secretary General, should convene a meeting of the UN Security Council, and UN Security Council should take up this matter. We should not leave the matter only between three parties, between Palestinians and Americans.
But the United Nations Security Council has convened many a times before. Many a times the resolution hasn't passed through because the UN has vetoed, US has vetoed it. The only time that a resolution was passed when the US abstained from it and it called the resolution non-maintainable. We need a maintainable resolution that could be applicable to the case of Israel and stop all the brutalities that are going there. You were speaking of Antonio Guterres. The United Nations has condemned the unacceptable level of violence becoming commonplace, not only against the people but also the humanitarian workers that are in Gaza as we speak. A record 280 have been killed in 2023 alone. They say that Israel is fueling even higher number of deaths this year. Will this condemnation that has come from the UN, because you were talking of Antonio Guterres, continue to fall on deaf ears as it has in the past, or will things change this time?
No, this kind of statements from the UN will not make any effect. We have seen UN not doing anything in the past also, and this is not going to happen unless the other permanent Security Council members and the non-permanent Security Council members, they get together and they go to the Secretary General and they raise a voice, and they should be condemning it, and just by mere condemnation and passing the statements will not make any effect. We have seen in the case of Kashmir also, UN has been passing every year, they just give out a handout statement, but nothing happens. So these kind of statements are just for, I would say, for the media consumption. It has got no implications. Yes, right now the major stakeholders, China, Saudi Arabia, other Middle Eastern countries, OIC, they must stand up and they must talk to US and they must become a party to it. Right now what we are seeing that everything is, the US is trying that everything should happen between the three stakeholders, between the Palestinians, between US and Israel. But I think
there are many more stakeholders.
There are many, not only many more stakeholders, but now after whatever has been happening, Europe is also a big stakeholder. But if we have seen that during the initial days, US had been involving Europe in the negotiations and all, but we have seen lately during last 2 months or 3 months, we have seen the European governments changing their stance. So that is why US has just left the European Union and NATO on one side, and they are not even discussing with them, because right now the mood in Europe is very much anti-Israel. If you see big protests happening all across Europe, and there are many European countries which in the past they have not been accepting Palestine as a state, but we have seen that due to their internal pressure of their public, they have accepted Palestine as a state. So these all stakeholders, European Parliament is also a stakeholder, OIC is also a stakeholder, UN Security Council is also a stakeholder. They should all get together and raise a voice. Otherwise, what I foresee that this thing is going to continue till the election. If there is going to be any kind of peace agreement, it will happen after the US elections, not before that, because any kind of peace agreement which is not acceptable to the Israelis will be detrimental for the US elections for Kamala Harris. So her party would not want that kind of thing, but because right now US is totally focusing on their domestic politics.
I understand. But speaking of domestic politics, the Democratic National Convention is going on in the US as we speak. Thousands of people have also taken protests on the streets of Chicago to talk about the Biden administration's support for the Israel's war on Gaza as this convention is going on. And it was because of that that Joe Biden also mentioned these very protesters during his address to the Democratic National Convention, saying that these protesters, quote unquote, on the street, they have a point. A lot of innocent people are being killed on both the sides, and adding that his administration is working around the clock to achieve a ceasefire agreement. I'd like to add another point to it. A British diplomat, Mark Smith, who is working at the Foreign Office, also resigned over the British complicity in war crimes because of selling of the military equipment to Israel. Do you feel such events like protests like those that are happening, that have also been mentioned by Joe Biden, all the resignation of diplomats in the UK, have any effect whatsoever on the future of the peace deal or this conflict?
The resignation has come by a junior level diplomat in UK. It is an individual act. I don't think that it will have any kind of effect in the overall UK's policy. But yes, the American public, if they go out on the streets and if they put up pressure on both the political parties, it's not just that Joe Biden's party has to be targeted. If the American people, they come out on the street and they force both the parties that, look, first let's decide this thing and then move forward towards the election. I think that is the only option right now. And the American public is already out on the streets. It is not only in Chicago. In the past, we have seen even in New York and many other cities, we have seen those protests. But those protests have been like a one-day event or something like that. There is no continuous support for those protests. And second thing, we must see the donor list of both the parties. Who are those donors?
Of course.
Even in US, all the big business holders are of the Jewish origin. So they would not want any kind of agreement which will be detrimental for Israel. But as I've said before, that right now this is the time that China, Russia and the other big stakeholders, they should come forward, they should force US to act, and they should also come as not only as a stakeholder but also one of the as a mediators also.
True.
We have seen, initially we had seen some European countries had come forward and some Middle Eastern countries had come forward for mediation. But right now, looking at the present situation, we don't find any international mediators. Even UN has got out of it. What I was thinking that the UN Secretary General would fly, he is already there in New York, he should fly to DC and he should just go and sit with the Biden administration. We have never, at least I have not seen any kind of such news on the UN website.
All right, let's go to my last question because we're a bit short of time. The Hezbollah Israel and the Iran Israel angle are also two angles that are very important to look at, especially in the context of what has happened. And of course, with Hezbollah, it has also attacked military targets in Israel because of the reaction of Israel that has also been attacking Hezbollah targets. Then we have Ismail Haniyeh, his assassination that Iran pinpoints toward Israel, and the deputy commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps promises an appropriate response in due time in place over the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran. How do you see these angles, and how do you see the escalation of war that is currently localized in a certain area but risks to broaden?
I think that we must appreciate Iran for acting very responsible. In last couple of months, we have seen Israeli aggression against Iran. We have seen that that Israelis have tried their best to drag Iran into a direct war. But we must appreciate this thing that Iran has proven out to be very responsible. They have not given any knee-jerk reactions. They have not even given any knee-jerk statements. They are assessing the situation. Of course, they have a right to retaliate because Ismail Haniyeh was targeted on their land and it was a direct Israeli aggression. But what Israel was expecting that, every time the Western media and the Western-controlled social media, they try to project Iran as a rogue state. But in last couple of months, Iran has given a very clear-cut message to the world, and I think this must be appreciated.
And it shows a lot of political maturity.
Yes, political maturity as well as maturity in handling the international situation. So I think Iran is not going to act immature. Iran is not going to drag itself in this war, but Iran is going to stay in sideline, but Iran is going to play a very pivotal role. And whenever this peace deal is going to happen, Iran will be playing, I think, one of the major roles in that.
All right. Thank you very much, Khalid Taimur Akram, international relations expert, to have come all the way to the studios and to discuss the ongoing political crisis and humanitarian crisis that has been engulfing since the 7th of October last year in Palestine. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. This brings us to the end of today's news. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories and segments that pertain to you, us and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.